Hello and welcome to lesson 2 of week 23. In this lesson, we are going to look at how to use the SQLAlchemy object relational mapping to write our queries. Now, in the last lesson, we have created a connection string and we also performed operations against a database table that we created, and we have the code here. So the first thing we did was to create a connection string, and then we created the engine, and then we used a context manager to connect to that engine and execute queries against the database table. And then we looked at it by trying to print out the rows of the table and all the data in the table. So we created a table called biometrics, and let's go to MySQL workbench. So we have this table called biometrics, and let's say I want to delete this table so we can recreate. So I'm going to use users, and then I'll drop table biometrics. So I'll run this query, and then the table biometrics is off. So let's start. The idea behind ORM, which stands for Object Relational Mapping, is to create a code representation of the database using classes and objects. Now recall that we have looked at classes and objects in part 2, and this is where it comes in handy because we want to create our models using classes instead of writing raw SQL statements. And so the classes will represent tables in the database, and the objects of the classes will represent the rows. So the first step we want to do is to define classes that maps to tables. And when classes represent tables in an ORM, we call it a model. So for us to start, I'm going to create a new file. Let's just create our files anyway, just for practice. And then next week, when we start building our proper structure for the software, then we are going to put things where things are supposed to be. So I'm going to create a new file called models.py. And in this models.py, I'm going to try to define the classes that are going to represent tables in the database. So we're going to try to create tables using classes and then insert into the tables. We want to first create our base class, and the base class must inherit from the SQLAlchemy declarative base. We can inherit directly, but I prefer to inherit it by creating a base and then inherit from the base class. So this is what we'll do. We want to import first. So I'll say from SQLAlchemy.extension.declarative, I want to import declarative base. So I'm going to close this so we can see declarative base is declarative base. We want to also import other stuff, but we're not going to import yet until we need them. So let me create my base class. I want to create a class called base, and I want it to inherit from the declarative base. I don't want it to be an abstract class. What I want to do is just write pass, and then I'm going to inherit from the base class like this. So what I want to do now is to create a person's table. Let's say I want to have an ID and a name for the person's table. We have to create a model called person, which will map to that table. So the idea here is to first define a table name, and this is how we do it. We create a class called person. So I like to keep the name similar. So let's say the class is called person, and person is going to inherit from the base here. We create the table with the attribute table name written like this, double underscore table name, and then person like this. I want an ID column and a name column. So what I want to use to get the ID and the name is, I want the Python typing system to define the column. And so the format for each of the column is going to be the column's name followed by another class called mapped with a Python type that matches the type that I want in the database. So for instance, if I have an ID attribute, I'm going to be using mapped int for the ID column because it's an integer field. For the name column, I'm going to use mapped string. So let's do that so you can understand. But before that, I want to use Python typing system. So I'm going to import from SQLAlchemy. I'm going to import integer and string because I'm going to be using that. I also want to import the mapped column. So I'm going to import this from SQLAlchemy.orm. I want to import map column. There is something else that we need to take note of. You see, when we use ORM like this, each model must have unique attributes. And because I want to ensure this uniqueness, I want to use a decorator that will ensure that a new instance is created for each subclass. So each subclass is like each of the model that I'll create. So let's create another model called base model like this. You can give it any name you want. The thing is, they are just conventional things that people do. And I want to create the base model. And what I want to do is to use a decorator called declared add. So you can read more about this to see what it does. But basically, the decoration ensures that a new instance is created for each subclass. But for me to be able to use that, I need to import that from SQLAlchemy dot extension dot declarative. I want to import declared attribute like this. And so once I put this decorator, I'll just create a function, table name, and what I want to do is that I want to ensure that a new instance is created for each subclass. So here now I'm going to be inheriting from both the base model and the base like this. So when I want to create the table now, I'm going to use the table attribute and then the name for the table that I want, which is person. The next thing I want to do now is to create the columns for the table. So I want to have an ID column, which is going to be a mapped int. And so I put ID, a column, and then I'm going to use the mapped int like this. And then I will say it's equal to map column. Now I also have to import mapped here. So mapping like this is going to help us to use Python type that matches the type we want in the database. So mapped int, I do it like this. I want it to be a primary key, so I set primary key to true, and then I want to have a name column, which is also going to be mapped, but now it's going to be map string, and I want the mapped column to be a string, and I want it to be of size 50. So this is the basic way to create a table using classes. We use the attribute table name to specify the name of the table. The class is person, inherits from the base model and the base class. The base class is the declarative base that we must inherit from, and I created a base class to inherit from that. And then I created a base model to ensure that a new instance is created for each subclass. This is just a standard you just have to do on all your files if you want to use this method before you start creating subclasses in our tables. So now we have a table person. We want to have ID, we want to have name, we want to insert into it. So this is the model. We can go to our app file now and change the code to be able to create that table and insert into the table. So now I'm going to delete what we have here from the biometrics, and then I'm going to try to, let's run this and see. We have the biometrics back. We have the data inserted into the database. Recall that we deleted that at the start of the class. But now I don't want to do it this way anymore. What I want to do now is to import my model from the models file. So I'm going to do from models. So models is the name of the file. So always make sure that the name of the file is in the same directory, so I don't need to bother about referencing. So I'm saying from models, I want to import, and there are two classes here I want to import. I want to import the base model, and I want to import the person model. So I can say from models import base model, and I want to import person. I also want to import the create engine and the text like we used in the last lesson. Now what I want to do next is, this is lowercase. What I want to do next now is to create the connection string like we had before to the same database. So connection string is equal to, now we know what the syntax is. The syntax is to use by using MySQL plus the driver MySQL connector, colon, / the username is root, the password, colon, and then we want to put the host and the name of the database. So you can put the host, the port 3306 is default, so we don't need to put that, and the database name I'm using is users. So I've written out my connection string. I want to create the engine, and the engine is going to be create engine connection string echo equals to true, and then I am going to now persons dot, so I want to table.create, and what I want to create is the engine, and let's say check first equal to true. We're going to explain this deeper next week, but I'm trying to get you started on how to create your tables from a model. So we just have one model called the person model, and we want to create the table in the database, and we also want to be able to run query against the table. So let me use the with statement. With engine dot connect as, so you can use as connection or as con, whatever you want, and then we want to write con dot execute. We use text, so let's say con dot execute text. We want to insert into person, name, value, John. So now recall that in the last lesson we said that you don't want to insert values directly, you want to use parameters. But this is how you insert values directly. When we start our development projects, we are going to be using parameters, placeholders, and then we're going to pass in a list of dictionary objects, and we're not going to be passing in values directly. But for this demonstration, I'm going to show you that so you can see how they exist. So I'm going to insert, or at least 3 items into the table, or 3 rows, and then I'm going to commit. Let's save this. I only need the person model. I don't need the base model here, just the person. So when I create a table, I connect to that table, insert into the table person. Let's go to this. So we should have registrations and biometrics, but we don't have person. I want to run this now, and then if all is well, I want to have the person table created with 3 of these values inserted into that table. So there is an error on line 1, and let's see what that error is. Okay, so I'm going to import declarative base from ORM, not this. So from SQLAlchemy.orm, I want to import declarative base here. Let's see, I think we have that here. Save this. I'll clear and make sure that this works now. Run, and yes, it works. So this has created a table person, so we can see the output. It gave us the raw SQL. We created the table persons. It began transaction. It committed the transaction. When we go to this and refresh, we should have a persons table. And when I say select all from persons, I should have all of my data that I inserted here. So this is the method we're going to use. We're going to be creating our models, and then we're going to be working with the models this way when we start creating our software project. Now this doesn't make too much sense. This is just a way to get you started and thinking before we delve deeper into the whole structure of creating a software like this. This is the basic way of using an ORM. Flax has a different method of using ORM, but you have to understand SQLAlchemy to use the Flax SQLAlchemy. I prefer doing it this way because it makes it more universal across other projects. But next week we are going to create our projects after planning the models, and we're going to see exactly how that works out. We're going to look at how we can use foreign keys and other constraints in a structure like this. So thank you, and see you next week.